Anthony, I wanted to see if Mary wanted to introduce herself real quick.
Yeah.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here today. I'm Mary Kennedy in the Cultural Resources Office, and I am our Historic Bridge Specialist. So I mainly work with projects involving historic bridges, although branch out in some other ones from time to time as well.
Thanks. All right, and I'll hand it off back to Anthony. Thanks, Mary.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Mary and Patrick. I should also say, I don't know if I said earlier, my title is LTA Administrator in the Cultural Resources Office, so I mainly deal with local projects, but also deal with some INDOT sponsored projects too. But with that, I'll go around and let's start with from LaPorte District, we've got Jessica Spees. Jessica, you want to say some introductory words?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Jess. I am a project manager up in the LaPorte District. I am one of those crazy project managers that did other things at INDOT before being a project manager, which is actually pretty common. So I was in environmental at the LaPorte District for 2.5 years, and I've been a PM for just about the same length these days. So I'm nearing year 3. And I grew up here in Northwest Indiana. I actually can trace my genealogy back on every side of the tree so far, 5 generations to here. So I am very much a Northwest Indiana person. But so I'm also a historian. I got my master's degree last year in 2020 as a public history major. So I'm a qualified professional. And when I was in environmental, I used to do some CRO work for the team. I don't do that much anymore because I have a lot of projects, but I am still a resource as needed. And yeah, I think that's a little bit about me.
Great, thanks, Jess. Let's see, we've got from Seymour District, we've got Brad Williamson. Brad, would you mind giving us a little introduction?
Sure. Brad Williamson. I'm a project manager in Seymour. Been a project manager for about 2.5 years. Prior to that, was environmental for 9 years and had a few other things before that. I've been with INDOT 25 plus years, so I've been around for a while. But yeah, so a little bit like Jess, I'm a Brown County person, and I go back 3 or 4 generations maybe. Then you get into Kentucky and Ohio, and everybody's coming up here to go logging. So that's how most of the people made their way here. But yeah, glad to be here. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's see. We've got a couple more from Seymour District. Travis, can you give us a little introduction?
Sure, Travis Mankin. Excuse me. I'm actually really doing the brown bag. I'm eating my salad. Yeah. Been a project manager for about 8 years down here. And before that, I was in several different areas as Brad and Jessica were, it sounds like. Been around about 22, 23 years. I've learned, I don't know a whole lot about this stuff, but every time I come up to it, I just reach out to you guys, the experts, and we always work our way through whatever challenge we got. I don't know, hobbies and stuff like that, I guess maybe camping, maybe one of my new big ones, because we bought a camper last year and we're going to make sure we use it now. So hopefully, keep your fingers crossed. And I appreciate you guys putting this on as well.
Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us. And we got one more, I think, from Seymour. Terry, do you want to introduce yourself? Just a short little bit.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'll soon have 31 years of service in, and just always trying to, stay updated with all our current operations and policies, and I just always want to learn more. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Terry. And we've got, let's see, we've got a couple PMs from Greenfield District. And I see Jennifer, would you mind giving us a little introduction?
Yes, hello, Jennifer Beck. I have been a PM at INDOT for 7 years, and I've always been a PM at INDOT, so I haven't been on any other departments. But I did start in the local group with solely local projects for a while before we all merged together, and now I probably have more state jobs than local jobs. But I grew up in Carmel. I live in Westfield. I didn't venture too far, and have a master's degree in construction engineering, so came straight from school to INDOT. And I got 2 little girls, 7-year-old and 4-year-old, and they take up most of my time. Besides, so I don't really have a lot of hobbies, but I do. I got my oldest into my real hobby, which is horseback riding. So we actually recently got back into it. So I'm jumping about 2.5 feet right now, which is cool for anyone who knows that. But yep, that's a little bit about me. I'm happy to be here and excited to answer questions and talk about 106 because it has taken up quite a lot of my time recently.
Yeah, I think I've heard that you had some complicated, good material for conversation later. Okay, yeah, and I think Mark Blake is also on the line from Greenfield District. Mark, would you mind giving a little introduction?
Hello, everybody. Mark Blake, Senior Project Manager, Greenfield District. Been with INDOT 13 years, almost 14, going in a PM for 12 of those years. Currently the lead for the Greenfield and Cambridge City Subdistricts team. I have Don McGackey and Nathan Riggs working alongside me with our projects in those 2 areas. Fun fact about me is I'm working toward my 2nd retirement here with INDOT. I retired in 2000 from the Navy after 20 years.
Wow, that is very impressive. Good for you. All right. We've got a couple PMs from Vincennes District. So Brian Malone, would you mind jumping on, giving us a little introduction? Oh, actually, Brian might not be on. So if he joins us later, maybe we'll get him to give a little introduction. But I think also from Vincennes District, we have Kayana Wheeler. Would you mind giving a little introduction?
Sure. So Kayana Wheeler, I am in the Vincennes District. I haven't really done anything else besides project management. This was my first job out of college, and I've been doing it for 6 years now. I guess a little bit about me is like I got married last year, so I was Moon, if Wheeler doesn't look familiar to you. And we're expecting our first little one in like 2 months. So
Wow.
that's what I've been doing recently. It's just being pregnant and tired. So.
Well, great. Congratulations.
Thanks.
All right, great. Well, I'm gonna hand it over to you in a sec, and maybe you can get the conversation kicked off. And in the meantime, just want to encourage everyone, chat your questions, your comments, or raise your hand. So, Mary.
Sure. So we'll be looking for any questions anybody has in the chat box. Until then, just kind of go over some things people might find interesting. I think one thing I would find interesting is becoming a PM. What kind of training did you have to do? How does one become a PM? And how do you learn your roles and responsibilities in being a PM? Since some of you came from a different area of INDOT, what did you have to do to transition to that, and how did it all come about? Looks like Jessica went. Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, I was waiting to see if anyone else wanted to answer first, but that's fine. So typically, most of the training you get is hands-on. So you're getting mentorship, sort of leadership training from the other PMs that are already in the positions, or these days we also have the PME training, which is a Purdue run course called the Project Management Essentials Training. So PMs today take that, but that's relatively new in the PM world. We didn't always do that before. And there's also the opportunity to take the PMP, which is basically a very high, I don't want to say high level, it's a higher level certification. It's basically like getting a PE if you're an engineer, is kind of how we equate it. So you have this PM experience, you wait a certain period of time, and then you can take this test and get certified and have your PMP. So those are the general things that we do as a project manager. I will say, as a person who worked in INDOT before that, that experience was really, really helpful for me, because I got to see how things worked before I was in charge of them. So sometimes that's a big benefit. And I think that's why a lot of people end up in the PM track, because you get to develop and grow further, because there are 3 levels of project managers these days. So it's a good opportunity for growth.
I would add to that as well, that agree with everything you just said, but also we try to also take trainings that INDOT offers for all the different departments. Since we touch every different area, I've done NEPA training, I've done utility certification, I don't even know, every little facet of our industry that we touch, just to get more information on it so that we can better support our teams go through it. So any and all training is relevant, I would say, for a project manager.
Because you have to know it all, right? Or enough.
Know enough to be dangerous is all you need to know. Not at all. You guys know all of it. We just know a little bit.
Yeah. Sean Miller had a question. He asked, what is the PM's role in project development and scheduling? That's probably a big question.
Our role, we set the schedules, I guess, as when a project is awarded or initiated, and it gets handed off to the project management team to deliver to construction. We are the ones responsible for procuring a consultant and setting a schedule, obviously in partnership with everybody involved to make sure everyone's in agreement. But that's probably the core of our responsibility, is to set that expectation and then ensure it gets delivered along with that original plan.
Yeah, and to build on that a little bit, to a certain degree, we get to set the schedule. So sometimes there are emergency projects that are supposed to be delivered in a really fast timeline, or in the case of most of our INDOT projects, they are programmed for a certain fiscal year and potentially a letting. So we're trying to deliver to that timeline, whatever that timeline is. And we don't usually, as a project manager, get to pick that. The technical services teams are the ones who put all that stuff together. They make a list for projects, and then we receive them and try to deliver them. So generally, we're overseeing the schedule once the end timeline has been developed, and we take it the rest of the way. Now, there's a caveat to that as well. If it's a local project, sometimes I have no control. So a local project is sometimes dictated by politics. It's sometimes dictated by the MPO that's helping with the funding. And sometimes it's generally out of my hands, and I am just there to be kind of the guiding force to get it delivered. I don't always get to pick when that's chosen, when it's added, even when it changes, because on the local side, it seems like, especially these days, our local projects are changing a little more fluid than they used to be. We always had some floating around, but things are a lot more movable, we'll say, these days.
Kind of along those lines, I know a lot of times we get into the process and we might have some thing that pops up that in the environmental process and Section 106 process we weren't anticipating, that we are like, oh, this is going to take more time in the schedule. And there's usually concern about, well, what does that mean? Are we going to have to change the schedule, shift the schedule? So I don't know if you could kind of comment on what are the ramifications when we do have that arise, and is it an easy process to get the schedule changed? What's that process? What justifications do you have to show, just so we get an idea of what one thing taking longer means overall, and how that impacts what you're doing?
I'll take this one. So I think it depends on how far it's moving. If it moves out of a fiscal year, then that takes a lot more effort and concurrence than if we're just moving that letting date within a fiscal year. And that if it does move a fiscal year, it requires what we call a tier 2 change management, which goes all the way to central office for approval. There is a pot of money that is assigned to those tier 2 change management. So it's a little bit easier to still get approval to move it while you're within that pot of money. But once that pot of money runs out, it gets even more complicated to move that project out of fiscal year, because then you're talking about looking for other projects to kind of move out and take place, because we only have so much money in each fiscal year. So if you can keep it within the fiscal year, that's your best bet.
And so thanks, Kayana. I know you've definitely dealt with some that have had issues with scheduling, some of our favorite historic bridge ones.
Yeah.
So in terms of the fiscal year, just for everyone's reference, so we're talking about the INDOT fiscal year, which would be July 1st to June 30th, correct?
Correct.
Which is different from the federal fiscal year, which can cause some confusion, I know.
Yeah, and that was what I was going to mention. So a fiscal year is July to May, June-ish. But the other thing to remember is that you have, as a project manager, a little more wiggle room depending on where it is in terms of a fiscal year. So if you're in right now, where 21 is done, basically. The May letting RFC was yesterday. So we're working on 22. We have this thing called lockdown, where we're supposed to lock in our dates for the whole fiscal year. So we're working towards that right now at every district across the state to get all of our projects lined up for delivery. After lockdown, you're really not supposed to move stuff unless you have to. So it's much more difficult when you get to that final stage where you're in that fiscal year constraint than if, say, you're in 23 or 24, where you can potentially move it if you need to later, or if you're a local project, you can, talk to your MPO and see about funding or however that works to maybe use up some of your float that you hopefully have built in and adjust your schedule accordingly. So it does vary depending on where you're at in the fiscal year and where you're at in your schedule. But sometimes you can have those conversations and be successful, and sometimes that's not really an option. There are specific metrics for project managers in terms of how we deliver projects and meeting our letting dates. So that's where all of that comes from.
Thanks, Jess. We have a question kind of related to this topic in the chat. There's a question: is there coordination with INDOT Environmental or INDOT Cultural Resources when the initial letting date is being set?
You're going to get a different answer from every PM on that, I will say, and at least every district. For Greenfield, I know, as Jess mentioned earlier, technical services scopes, and for certain fiscal years, the projects and when they're awarded, we're given that end date that we have to meet. But while they're scoping for a certain fiscal year, they coordinate with all the different departments at the district level. Central office level, probably depending on the project and level of complexity, but usually the district personnel contribute to the discussion to get the right scope set and budget and fiscal year, even though you're putting it in for a specific fiscal year. But as far as the control, I mean, when you're putting in within the fiscal year, where that letting date falls is that's where you're going to get a different answer per district and per PM, because there's different strategies, different factors to balance when you set that date. So that's always part of, that's in the back of your mind, environmental as well as finance, constructability, whatever, favorable bidding times, all that stuff too.
One question I had, it just made me think about this. I know that sometimes I feel like project managers are assigned projects by counties or just, areas. Is that common across the districts, or are assignments just varied depending on, or do you try to get it, to a area of your
We should
district?
have everyone answer this one. All the PMs should answer this. It's geographic. We are geographic on our end. So,
Okay.
like I'm Hamilton County and Tipton County. That's the only place you're going to see me.
I would say.
Seymour,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah,
No,
Seymour is not geographical really, but when we sit down and we go through our projects, I'll try to grab everything I can in the areas close to home, and a lot of the other PMs do that as well. But it's really up in the air.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and LaPorte is kind of like that. So we actually have some PMs that handle like the southern edges of the district. And then there's some of us who are just so blessed to work in Lake County almost every single day. And so it kind of varies. But that being said, most of my projects are in Lake and Porter. However, I have local projects that are down in Fulton County, pretty much the other corner of our district. And I like that. I like having a little variation every once in a while. So that's really great for me, but it varies district to district. And sometimes it varies on what type of project it is. So one of our other project managers in LaPorte has a traffic background. So he does almost all of the traffic projects, no matter where they are in the district. So there's other caveats that go along with that as well. And local PMs, so PMs that have local projects and state projects, they tend to gravitate to the same place. So like in Lake County, I have Munster and Hobart projects on the local side, and then I also do a lot of Lake County projects on the state side. So that way there's kind of a connection there with our locals and our state folks.
What about Vincennes, Kayana? How do you all divide projects up?
So it's by area as well. And until you get to some of those more complicated projects, then those aren't by area. We typically leave those to the PMs that have been there a little longer. So you'll see PMs step outside of the counties that we typically manage, but for the most part you'll see the same PM in the same area for most projects.
Okay.
Cool. And I think, this was touched on in a couple of the responses, but one of the big things that we wanted to ask you guys about, and I have particular interest in, is the difference between managing a local project versus an INDOT sponsored project. And so, what are the differences in your roles and responsibilities, and maybe the challenges that you face? So I'd be really interested to hear from any of you who have experience, doing both local and INDOT sponsored projects.
Yeah, I'd love to answer that as someone who started in the local program, and then it was very weird for me to take on state projects, and I'm way more responsibility on the state side, that's for sure, and more control though. On the local side, it's more of an advisory role. You're more a reference, you're a point of contact, you're ensuring they're complying with federal and state regulations. So you meet quarterly and just get updates from the local. But it really depends on the local how involved you end up being. So in my area, I have very sophisticated locals that have engineering staffs and are very well versed in the process. So my role with them tends to be more making sure they know how to find loopholes and trying to make sure you keep them in line a little bit. But then you have your rural counties who it's someone's part-time job to do everything for the town as well as run a project. And so you're way more involved in the regular management process for them as you are, you know, the city of Carmel or Hamilton County and all them. So it ranges your responsibilities based on the local you're working with, let alone. But then state projects, you have the direct control. You're the one talking to the consultant all the time and keeping in the weeds of the project. But on locals, the local talks to the consultant. They're the ones coordinating the regular, how things are moving, what the scope is, if things change, and you're just the advisory role.
Yeah, so I'll add to that a little. I think it's definitely interesting how they're different. My only experience with the locals has been on a couple of select historic bridges in Crawford County. And like Jennifer said, you know, you have these like municipalities that do their own projects, right? You're just there to make sure they follow. But Crawford County, like they're one of the more rural counties in Indiana, and you know, they don't even have anyone over the town or the county. It's their commissioners that are really keeping track of the project. So it's almost more involvement than like the state projects would be, and they're looking to us to make their decisions for them because they just don't know, honestly. And you know, when the commissioners are the ones that are making those project decisions, and commissioners could switch in the middle of a project, like it's just an added layer of complexity. So those have been my only experience so far, and it seems like they have honestly taken more work and more coordination and like just staying on top of them than even some of my state projects. So and I think that's, you know, not typical for all local projects. That's just been, you know, these specifically.
Yeah, I would.
Oh, go ahead, Travis.
I would concur with all those statements about local, and I see Karen's asked a question about the schedule, and that does get to be a difficult issue with us last year, especially so. Typically, the locals don't want to move their date out, even though you're telling them, you know, whether it's 106 or they're not done with right of way or something else, they're not gonna, it just will not let. They don't want to listen to you, and they'll want to keep that on track. And so we get into that situation a lot where we're asking to send things in, maybe that aren't complete, stuff like that. So that is, they're in a little bit more control. I think we can take a stand if it's so bad it's just got to move at a certain point. You know, you can kind of take a stand, but you can also get overruled sometimes. So it's a tricky little tightrope walk that you do there.
Travis, that reminded me, MPOs is a big thing to emphasize as well. You have two types of local funds. Either it's rural funds directly from INDOT, so we're the ones authorizing the funding and approving it, or you have funds that we pass through an MPO, and the MPO is responsible for awarding projects within their jurisdiction. And in those cases, you know, obviously all projects have a fiscal year, and then within the fiscal year, whoever awards that money or controls the money gets to allow you to move it within it. I work in the Indy MPO, and they are very, you know, they want all letting dates before December because they want to obligate all their money by a certain time. So that's always a huge, anything past December, they give you this whole spiel, well, it might end up moving out or you lose your money, and it's a whole thing. So that difference of local projects, where if it's rural or MPO, that's another factor into the schedule flexibility as well, to think about.
Yeah, and that was exactly what I was gonna say. Is when an MPO is involved, it's usually an added layer of oversight. So the MPO is also doing some work to keep the projects moving locally, but they might also be setting the timelines and the dates. So their funding is year by year, just like INDOT's, but they need to deliver projects. And sometimes we have the issue where everything goes haywire. And how do you deliver anything in a fiscal year? That seems like a really crazy thing that would happen, but it does happen from time to time. And it depends on the type of projects you're doing and who's doing them. And so that MPO factor can really assist how a project develops, but it can also, you know, be an added layer of difficulty in the end, because maybe like Jennifer said, you have to deliver it by December, or up here in NERC, we try to deliver by February letting. There are exceptions to the rule, of course, but that is what we try to do because they want to spend their money, and we want them to spend their money because it's money that INDOT doesn't have to spend. So it's working in that balance and getting everyone on the same page to do that. And sometimes my view as a PM is really just there to say, okay, I will help you get what you need to get it delivered. Whether that's helping and making sure things are getting submitted on time, they're getting to the right reviewers, we're getting final tracings reviewed. It can vary across the board, but the local projects can be really complex and a lot of oversight and work together, or they can be really simple. It really varies a lot more than a state project. And I think everybody did a really good job explaining that and how those differences can really build that way.
Thanks, Jess. It looks like Mark has your hand up. Do you want to add to that conversation, Mark?
Yeah, just a little side bit is that even though some of these local projects are funded with state and federal funds, some of their money comes from grants. And those grants have certain time limits to when they have to be allocated out, or they lose that money. So sometimes these locals will set these dates based on the fact that they have to deliver that project by that date, or they'll lose that grant money. So that's one thing we have to keep in mind also as we develop them, to make sure everything fits into that time frame, that we can deliver the project in that time frame for them.
That's a good point.
Yep. I want to. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think it, really the local situation highlights. There's a little bit of, it's a little more like triangulation between all the different parties, because you guys, UPMs, are kind of managing INDOT's resources and our assistance to the LPA, and wanting to provide assistance and customer service to the local agencies, while at the same time having to deal with the finite amount of resources that we as an agency have and the ability to advance these projects. And when sometimes it's hard saying no, right? It's a difficult situation being in that, telling the LPA what they don't want to hear, especially because their consultants are under contract to them, and not to the agency. So we're not dealing with the straight direct line between us and the consultants in those types of situations. We've got looks like a pretty good, healthy conversation going on in the chat, so we'll try to back up, I guess. But Patrick, you were gonna say something.
No, I was actually gonna start the backup conversation.
Go ahead.
Okay, because I didn't want to lose some of these, but we did have a question. How do you all stay organized when juggling so many projects that are in various stages of completion? And how do you prioritize projects?
Lots and lots of alcohol.
That's the secret.
You never know what's in the coffee mug.
I would say on my end, INDOT's been trying to improve our data and our data integrity in terms of what we're sharing with people, what we're putting in SPMS and our other systems. I am making those systems work for me now. It's taken a lot of work on my end. I still have a separate spreadsheet that I use that also gives me red alerts. But I try really hard to use our data systems to manage that. And I try to circle back to my projects, usually at least once a month. Some of them it's far more frequent than that. And as you're getting closer to the submittal deadlines, you always have to, do a little bit more. But I'm also a big planner. So I'm always planning time to do some of those things I need to do, whether it's a evaluation or follow up or schedule a meeting, or, you know, it could be any number of things. I have improving in the last year my system to try to really check that. But just a note, I know here at the LaPorte district, most of our project managers have anywhere from 75 to 100 projects at various stages of development. I'm sitting right around 100 right now, and that includes stuff in construction. So it is a difficult task, and it is hard to keep up, but you can do your best to do that. But we also, you know, I'll be the first to say I sometimes miss an email, and I don't get upset when I get a follow-up. So stuff like that is generally how I keep track.
Yeah, I think everybody's. Oh, go ahead, Jennifer.
I just said I was sticking with the alcohol answer.
Yeah, I think probably every project manager has their own way of trying to keep tabs on things. But you know, I always look at it as a team effort too. I mean, there's a lot of faith being put out there, you know, that our teammates are also keeping track of things once it's assigned to them, and if they, you know, notice that something's getting off the rails, that they'll reach out to us and let us know, or if they haven't heard from us for a while. One thing in Seymour, and I think probably a lot of the districts do, is we get a monthly report from the consultants on each one of our projects. And if you know, the consultants using that as a tool, it's a real beneficial way for us to stay up to date on things.
Yeah, and I can add a little bit, something that's really helped me stay organized is you guys. When you get something in, I really like how you guys assign it out in cultural resources, and you give turnaround times. I think, Sean, I've seen you send something out for archaeological, and I can see who you sent it to and the deadline you gave them to get it done. And I really appreciate that, because then I know if that's past a deadline I kind of need, I can ask for a favor to speed it up or whatever, if it is a really hot project. But I think I've sent a kudos a few times back to people, thanking them. If all departments would do that for us and keep us in the loop, it would help us a lot. And that's very appreciative that you do that.
Well, I think that kind of goes into one thing we were talking about. We wanted to ask you all today too. It's like, we know you probably are inundated with emails all day from all your projects, but like what sort of communication style do you like? How involved do you want to be? Do you want to be CC'd on every email that goes between, you know, all the, you know, environmental services groups to consultants? Like, you know, what helps you all stay up to date on a project, or what's going on a project? Environmental wise, I guess, at least.
Well, I have my hand up, so I'll go ahead and jump on that one. But I'm going to go back to the previous one. Is one of the things that I do is I want to make sure I learn my project from start to finish. What's all the steps in there? We PMs have what's called a critical path when we build these schedules. Well, we see where the potential pitfalls come into play. So we, on those set projects, we make sure that those are the goals that we drive more to. We know design can get done by a certain amount of time, and we know that, you know, all that work, you know, permits. We have to be alert of how long those permits are going to take, so they have them in hand by time. Right away is another big stumbling block for us. How many parcels are we going to buy? How many of those are going to end up in condemnation? And how is that going to impact the delivery of it? So those are two of the factors we go into. Now, to the other question, and of course my mind being as old as I am has just gone south. So so Patrick, can you restate the question, please?
Yeah, what helps you all from our you know, when you on, you know, because Travis mentioned he likes seeing that from cultural resources. You know, Sean specifically, you know, will assign something, tell who the reviewer is going to be, how many days the turnaround time will be on that review. So is that something, you know, other project managers like? And then beyond that, what else, what do you prefer in terms of communication between our group, consultants, do you want to be CC'd on every single email? What are your kind of thresholds of, hey, I need to know what's going on at this time, because this is going to affect my schedule, sort of thing.
Yeah, each of us PMs are probably going to say something different, but I prefer an email because that is a documented discussion we've had, and I can always refer back to that if something starts to slip or something starts to fade a little bit. If someone tells me I'm going to give this to you by X day, and then a few days after that go by and I haven't seen it, I got that, hey, you told me back you would have this for me on this date. I still haven't seen it. Can you give me an update? And I keep every email. For every project I get an email, and I personally want to be included in all email traffic. If it involves my project, I want to be included in it. I want to see that conversation between maybe you and the environmentalist or whoever submitted the application for the permits. I want to see all the communication on that, because that way, if I start to see something slip getting back to you, I can chime in also and say to that individual, hey, you're killing us here. You're going to be missing. We're going to miss a deadline if you don't get stepping up. So.
Yeah, and something I've noticed that Anthony does as well, and all of you guys are doing a great job of it. But when he gets something in, he acknowledges he received it, and it's in the queue, and it'll be X amount of days to get it back. And I love that, because so many times we don't know if it got received, and then when you check on it 30 days later, well, it just happened to slip through the cracks, and that doesn't happen a lot, and sometimes it does. And then when it does, you just lost 30 days. So having that acknowledgement that it happened, the emails are easy to skim over. It's not like I have to dig deep into it. I'm like, great, you got it, we're rolling. And so I'm like Mark, it won't hurt my feelings to be copied on everything. And I know when I need to dig deep into them or just skim over them and just be like, all right, good deal, it's rolling.
Yeah, and so to build on that, I think I also agree. I love emails that I am CC'd on that are simple, that I can put in my inbox folder and walk away from and know that something is happening. Like, those are the best emails. I want those every day. And just building on that, there is the new communication section in the CE manual that basically says you should copy your PMs so they know what's going on, especially with maybe things that aren't going to fall in the MPPA, where we know there's other hoops that we're going to have to jump through to get the HPR or whatever. Having that correspondence and knowing that it's been submitted is huge for me. It's also really important, and we haven't really talked about this yet, but it's really important as a project manager for me to have those emails, because it helps me update my schedule, which I'm supposed to be doing, and it helps me update my risk, which I'm also supposed to be doing on every single project. So if an HPR comes in and Mary says you're going to have to, do a full historic bridge analysis, and we weren't planning on that for whatever crazy reason, that's a risk that I am putting in my SPMS programming right away, to say that there's a likelihood that this is going to come up and we're going to have to change. Or in my inbox currently today, there's a conversation about how we thought maybe we were in disturbed soils for archaeology and we might not be. That's a risk. I'm CC'd on that. I'm not going to do anything with it, except I'm going to make it a risk. And I love those emails for that specific reason. It keeps me in the loop, and it keeps me aware of where our critical path items may be, where the hiccups could be involved, how our schedule could go sideways, and all of those items. It's also really important because, especially in the cultural resources world, it's a sub-consultant that's doing the work for you guys. I don't typically talk to my subs. My prime consultants are supposed to do that, but it's been happening a lot in the last year or so where the sub is doing stuff and the prime and I have no idea. And that's sometimes really, really concerning depending on the project. Sometimes it's an MPPA determination and it's not that big of a deal. But if an archaeology issue or something of that nature, and I don't know what's happening with that project or that it's even been started, first of all, I can't help you get it turned around because I don't know that it's happened or been submitted. But second of all, I need to make sure that I'm identifying that risk and making sure my schedule is correct for that. So I personally love those emails. I think Mark is right, though. If you ask 20 PMs, they might give you 20 different answers. But I do think it's a really important thing for us to know. And you guys really do a wonderful job with that, in keeping us in the loop and aware of what's going on. And it's much appreciated.
I do want to add, since I know a lot of our audience on here are consultants, that as you've heard from multiple people, every PM likes different levels of communication. I would encourage that at the start of every job on your kickoff meeting, we always discuss our communication expectations. So I would encourage to hear this, but from a project delivery standpoint, make sure you understand your expectations of communication from primes to subs to INDOT, who's copied, who's directed, who's whatever. Definitely establish that on a per project basis. That's just a disclaimer I wanted to say.
Yeah, I think that's a real good point, Jennifer, because I was actually getting ready to say the same thing. I mean, from a INDOT cultural resources, I mean, that's one thing, but then for every project, some project managers, such as myself, might not want to be on every early coordination letter and every, because the fact it starts going across the board with utilities, and I mean, it's kind of the mailbox would just be crazy. But some people might prefer that, others not. So yeah, I think that's a good point.
Well, that's great. That's really helpful to hear, and really good advice, I think. So let's see. I've got a lot of questions in the chat. I know. Let's see. Going back, trying to find the first one to keep everyone in order. We've got Nathan.
Yeah, I think it's his.
So he asked a question. He says he's a new SAM. With time being a constant battle, what is the perspective of the quick turnaround on maintenance contracts? Are they easier since they are M contracts, or are they difficult given the tight time frame?
I'm wanting to say that that's no longer going to be an issue, because I think now we're getting everything in a 5-year plan. So previously it was, they called them placeholder projects, and they could turn into issues, but if right away was needed or permitting got involved. But I think they're going to roll. We're going to get to 5-year now, so that shouldn't be a problem.
Looks like Nathan raised his hand. Did you want to add to your question?
I wanted to clarify maintenance contracts that maintenance is only given funding a year in advance or for that following year. So on the Fort Wayne side, when we're programming, we're limited to a few months before when they start to get an idea of their funding. So we've got about a year turnaround to develop these maintenance contracts. It's not one of the ones that's on a 5-year program.
Oh.
Yeah, so these are like the mowing contracts or trash pickup or things of that nature, herbicide, stuff like that. And so I think most of the time we do them year after year. So in LaPorte, at least, they're generally between 1 or 2 project managers who just cranks out all of the maintenance projects. And since you don't have to change much, a lot of times we don't even change the routes. It's just an update, and it does take some time, but it's usually not too terrible. And in terms of environmental stuff, it's usually pretty limited. At least it used to be. I could be wrong. I haven't delivered a maintenance project in a while, but they're usually a lot simpler to handle and to kind of turn around.
Okay, we must be tossing curveballs at our PMs. We'll do patching contracts and some inch and a half mill and fills on some of these maintenance contracts that are tighter time frames. So I was just curious.
Yeah, we're not doing a lot of paving on our end. It's mostly mowing, brush, clearing the right of way kind of stuff. There's no, I mean, IDIQ would be the exception to that, but that's a whole separate can of worms.
Thank you very much.
We got another question. It said sometimes projects are redesigned after 106 has begun or after it has ended, creating a need to revise or even reopen 106. This adds cost and sometimes time to completing NEPA. Have you identified this as an issue? Any thoughts about how we can limit revisiting projects in the 106 process?
The thought I have is don't change your scope. Have a good scope. But the most of the time this happens because either something we didn't know was there is there, maybe archaeology, maybe a historically significant house or something of that nature. And we need to reevaluate after the fact. But doing your due diligence early on is the best and sometimes only way to prevent that from happening. And I think on the INDOT side, we're getting a lot better at that. On the local side, sometimes that's where it really can destroy your project timeline. If you can't finalize your scope or you didn't have the best all-encompassing evaluation, maybe like a red flag sort of thing to identify all of those potential issues, you might have to retrace your steps and reconfigure that. And it's kind of just the nature of the beast. It's the nature of how we deliver things and how we're developing things these days that sometimes that's going to happen. Hopefully it's happening less and it's happening to a degree that's lesser than it used to be. Personally, though, I have 2 projects where I could say that that's potentially happened. So it's not that rare because I still have them, but it is something we're aware of and we try to work around.
I would say one thing Greenfield's been doing, and maybe other districts too, we don't talk as much as we should to know what all the other districts do, but we have on projects that we always have a defined scope. The level of detail is getting more, but you never know what you're getting. But any project that has a good potential for different products, or I mean, it's still the same scope, but like an intersection improvement, and is it a roundabout? Is it a signal? Are you just adding turn lanes? Like where we might have a defined scope, but we want the consultant to dig into it a little more before we totally move forward. We do phased approaches on contracts. So we'll do a first phase where you're just doing an engineering assessment, even if it's an abbreviated one, just to supplement one already done for scoping, but just one more look, like go out and get survey. Let's go out and maybe do some initial field work for environmental and call on utilities, do some initial things and get that first, really clarify that scope with an actual consultant on board, and then move forward with the future contract for full environmental services, full design fees, and with a more confident idea of what you're actually going to produce. So that's another thing when you know at the beginning, hey, this could turn into something else. Let's just phase the design fees so that we can try to be a little more accurate. So I feel like the cases that I've had where we've redesigned and re-impacted 106, it's always something's expedited and we're shoving something through really quickly, and then Indiana Landmarks comes in one day and decides they don't like what we're doing. But something comes, you're trying to move too quick. You in a perfect world, you define that scope before you even start environmental, but that's never reality. So that was one of the questions we were prompted with earlier, and I remember looking at that and I was like, I don't know that we'll ever get away from that. But it's always good to shoot for the stars.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would add to that too is just to engage our central office cultural resources folks soon. If you do see something you think might be an issue, just engage them quick, get them involved. During your engineering assessment report if you can, or whatever, and then hopefully you'll steer free from having to do that. Like you say, don't change your scope either, but yeah.
All right, thank you. One thing about expedited projects, we've seen like, we talk internally a lot. It seems like most projects now are expedited. And I was wondering, what is your sense of why that is, or why does it feel like, and is it, I'm sure you see that too, right? Of course. So where is that pressure coming? Where's that pressure start, in the pipeline to expedite? And does it feel like to you all there's more right now than usual?
Yeah, absolutely. Last year, had a lot of asks for expediting. Most of it was blamed on COVID, and for whatever reason, whether they couldn't get into a courthouse or they couldn't get here or there, or that was the biggest backlog for everything, it seemed like. But I think sometimes people are expediting maybe for the wrong reasons. And I try not to burn favors. So I like to keep my favors, if I'm asking, I really got a reason for it. So I like the new guidance you guys put out that it probably should come from the PM. Yeah, so, but it has increased, not sure why, other than maybe the COVID and the setback.
Sure.
I was just going to say my expedited projects tend to just be a political reason, and you don't, sometimes it's the project itself was political, so from day one it was expedited. Sometimes it's halfway through it became so controversial that now it's political and get it done sooner or whatever, and it's hard to predict those. I just expect it these days. But
yeah, and I think on my end, I'm like Travis. I try to keep my favors in my pocket as long as I can. I don't want to ask. I rarely will ever ask for an expedited review if it's not in our current fiscal year. If it's in 23, and even though it means my schedule's at risk, I'm not asking. And I will tell my design team that that's how that's going to go. Because I think part of it is I've been in your guys' position. I've been a reviewer who's had 30 expedited reviews on her desk at once and is somehow supposed to crank them out. So I know that. But I think the other bigger issue is the fiscal year 2021 was huge in terms of projects, in terms of coordination and all of the stuff that entails. And I think, in all honesty, there's a capacity concern across the board. As a PM, you guys with the workload you're doing, so INDOT staff's not really increasing in size, and the consultants, everyone is having to pick up the slack to deliver all of this stuff. And at some point, we're all gonna miss one thing, and then they're all gonna add up. So just being mindful of that and trying to keep in mind, what's the critical path items, what ones do we need to take precedence on, or give a priority to maybe. Those are always my concerns, and those are the ones that I'll ask about. But there's also times where even if it is critical, I'm not gonna ask, because part of my job is to hold people accountable. It's the hardest part of my job, probably, because sometimes you are the bad guy. You have to say to the local, your project's not getting delivered, or you've run out of time. And maybe sometimes it's on the state side too. I have it on the state side all the time. But choosing to take that tact and that path to do the right thing, and to hold everyone equally accountable, I guess is maybe the better phrase, is something I try really hard to do. So that's something that matters for me. And it's something I consider every time I send, an email asking for an expedited review or asking where something is, because sometimes it's just that. And a lot of times I'll send that, hey, where is this email? To just say, hey, I know it's in your queue, right? And then you're good. And it's not me saying I need this right now. It's me saying you still have it. right? Like I didn't miss an email, something didn't go missing, it didn't disappear into the ERM's abyss, kind of a deal. So I think that those are the big things for me. And it's something you have to actively consider because it's just the way the world is currently working. So.
Yeah, I think, on our end, there have been some situations where we run into having to really ask about expedited requests, and sometimes they're either not necessary because actually when you sit down and do the schedule, it's not critical that that we have more time than maybe we need than what we thought. Or on the other hand, sometimes when they sit down and do the schedule, you realize whether or not you do an expedited request is not going to make the difference. That the schedule is shot, right? Which is really too bad. But at that point, it's not a good use of resources to do the expedite, right? So. Let's see. In the chat, we have a question from Mike Hoy about whether there are any current hot topics with respect to CRO, commonly overlooked items, new focus on additional investigations required, ADA curb ramp compliance needs versus cultural resources impacts. So I guess that's kind of a big question, but maybe common cultural resources related issues that you guys from a project management perspective run into.
So curb ramps are probably my number one. And I would say over time, it does seem like SHPO has changed and is maybe becoming, I don't want to, it's not like they were ever super strict about it, but we have a little more leeway than we used to, is what I'll say, in terms of curb ramps in front of maybe a historic structure or something of that nature. The other thing is homes that could be listed that aren't. And I actually have a project in Hammond/Whiting that might be a good example of that. We'll see what happens as it starts to develop, because it could be post-war fun. I don't know. We'll see. But it should just be curb ramps. So I don't really think it should be bad, but you never know. So I think those are the two big ones, especially on the local side, is they don't always see those historic potential items that could really hold up a project. And we do a lot of sidewalks, but sometimes even like intersections, that can be a big deal. So those are the two I see the most.
Yeah, and I think in general, just as a resource type, we've talked a lot for the last year or more about the post-war resources, and so that's an area, it's huge. We have a lot, and we're still always navigating how we address those post-war resources that we have so many of, and so yeah, that's still a big deal that we still are always continuing, navigating how to address those.
I have a question about an area that's kind of new over the past year due to changes at INDOT and changes just changes in what's going on in life with COVID, and that's public involvement. And so, each of the districts is now, having the public involvement role kind of shift out there more so maybe than in the past, since we don't have the central office public involvement. So I didn't know if any of you want to kind of talk about the PM's new roles in this process and responsibilities for public involvement and how that works.
I was talking to Ron Bales the other day about the new procedure, and Mary Wright retires, and they decided to change. I'm still not sure why they just didn't refill her position. She was golden. I think that one point contact is needed. I think that you need to be an expert in that field. I know we got consultants that can handle it, but we also have a lot of turnover. PM world consultants. I think each district's doing a little bit different. Who really is in charge of what? And I think it's just a matter of time before that might become a problem. But with that being said, I mean, we are doing it, and we do have designated people. I'm just fearful, what might happen if we start kind of messing a few of them up. My 2 cents on.
So to build on what Travis is saying, so if you guys aren't aware, so Mary and Ricky are no longer leading the way in public involvement, and their duties have basically fallen onto the project managers who are in charge of the project. We're now just doing the public involvement. So anything that Ricky or Mary used to do, we are now doing ourselves. And like Travis said, it varies district to district. And it honestly varies project to project, because a lot of times with public involvement projects, we know going in what that's going to look like. Basically that we need public involvement. And so that can help us plan for that better. So maybe the PM doesn't have to do all of the work, and the consultant side can assist with that, because some of our consultants are really, really fantastic at doing public involvement, and that can be huge in terms of delivering the project in the proper, code sort of enforcement way. That being said, there's also the local side, and I think I was one of the first local projects to have a public involvement meeting after we decided the PMs were in charge. And we're still not done with that project. And I don't know that would have changed in any way. It's not because of what we did or anything like that. But it was a difficult project because we did it, this summer during COVID life. And it was a big learning experience for all of us. I used to do public involvement when I was in environmental, so I have that background, but it was even still a difficult thing for me to return to and kind of retrain myself to be prepared for. And I think that's really the concern that most of us have as PMs is like Travis said, making sure we're doing it right, that the advertisements getting in the paper appropriately, that we're meeting all of the standards we're supposed to meet, both for ADA and disabilities beyond that, and providing the right public service to the public, because that is part of our job. So I think that's the critical item. But the big thing to remember is that Ricky and Mary are gone, and that's now on the PM team. So the consultant services managers are also involved, but it's very much at the district level these days.
Yeah, even the simple things like who to contact, which newspapers for that area. She just had been doing it so long, she knew all that. There was no. I just felt more confident, I guess, that all the T's were going to be crossed and I's dotted. I mean, I'm sure we're still doing it with our consultants and what we're doing, but it's just a learning curve, maybe.
Yeah, and I know it has to add to the complexity of your jobs, for sure. So Tony brought up safe routes to transit. So yeah, I think we see probably more on the LPA side, or all LPA safe routes projects and sidewalk and curb ramps on those that we could have issues with. So here's another question. What advice would you give to consultants who will do this PI work with you in Prime? Have a kickoff meeting?
Yeah, you'll definitely have a kickoff meeting. I mean, in a perfect world, it's included in your scope of services. So when you're negotiating a fee proposal for the project, this is included in that. So the consultant firm that's selected and the consultant team, they will be aware of that, and then we'll have meetings and progress and set up and make sure a schedule works and you have what you need, and we can dot all those I's and cross all those T's together. Because it really is, even when Ricky and Mary were here, it was still very much a team effort. They knew the logistics of, you know, setting everything up and running a meeting and keeping everyone together, but we still had to provide all that information to them. So that hasn't really changed. It's just who's doing it and are we still following the standards that we need to. The public involvement manual is there to help with those things. And we are going to rely on that more and more so that we can make sure we're doing what we need to do the right way.
Thank you. As we look to start wrapping up in a minute, for the project managers, is there anything, any parting advice or things you want consultants or us to know about anything about your job or how to make your jobs easier or the projects go better? You know, is there, I know that's probably hard to define, but
Jessica was very eager to answer that.
Yeah, like I have had this sticky note on my desk for like 2 weeks because this was the one thing I wanted to say the whole time.
Okay. No, that's great.
So the biggest thing for me as a project manager and the biggest takeaway for folks is to realize that as a project manager, I'm really, really concerned as to how a project is being developed. I need to know the risks, but I also need to know the dates. So if a project manager sends you an email and says, okay, you missed this deadline, when are we going to have it? If you send back soon, I'm going to be really sad. Like, give me a date. I love dates, and dates help us all do a better job. And it's okay to set a date and miss a date. A lot of times we have float built in for that. So don't be afraid to have that conversation, but also don't string me along for 4 months if you know you're not going to be able to meet it. If you know that you can't go do an archaeology investigation because there's maybe 3 feet of snow on the ground, that's a thing. And a PM might not know that. So when those situations arrive, be sure to communicate that, but also try to set some good, you know, dates and conversation points as you develop, because I think that's the thing that I miss the most with working in the virtual life is I used to be able to go chase people down and get dates, and now I can't. They just choose not to answer my phone calls. So I think if you can take the time to make sure you have that relationship, whether it's with your prime, if you're a sub, or your PM, to ensure that we're all on the same page and we're aware and we're meeting our dates, or we're setting realistic dates at the very least. I think that's huge. That's my number one takeaway.
I would like to say with this audience that I just appreciate everyone that I get to work with on a regular basis on the consulting side, INDOT side, contractor side, everyone. And I think that this year for me has brought to realization what I think a lot of us knew was coming with a lot of the added funding that we're getting with the gas tax, and of course COVID throws wrenches in that, but we've been delivering such a huge program, and that strain has finally caught up with, I think, everybody. So like this expedited reviews on everything, and you know, I have projects where contractors are coming to me and they're like, I'm going to be a year late, and I have nobody to blame but myself because we have too much work. And we have consultants who are like, I have a bunch of work and I have to ask for this deadline to push because I know we have room for that deadline to push. And I just want to say, I think we're all doing a great job, and we understand. we understand the overworking that everyone is dealing with. So don't be afraid to let us know if the date's not going to be met in advance, and be honest and transparent. And I think that's the best way we're all going to get through it together. But just a shout out, because I've been realizing these past couple of months, all the cracks are starting to show from this program that we're delivering, and we're all in it together. That's what they say, right?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think that's true.
I think that's great advice, especially the honesty and transparency. You know, don't kick the can down the road kind of thing. It's only going to get worse if you're not honest about it, right?
Or overpromise, you know,
Right.
because that doesn't do anybody any favors if you because that's just gonna, yeah, it just kicks the can and makes it worse later. Yep.
I want to say thank you to everyone who's participated in the chat. There's lots of good comments in there too, and I don't know, we might not have gotten a chance to answer every question or note every comment. So thanks to everyone, and it's there as a record, and hopefully we can go back and refer to it in the future.
I just wanted to say, oh, sorry, Patrick.
Oh, you go.
I just wanted to say thank you guys for the opportunity. We're always happy as PMs to share what we do. It helps make the team as a whole better. So I love these brown bags, but I'm really glad we got to do this one today.
Oh, great. Thank you. And we want to say thank you all to the PMs who participated. We know you're like so busy, and to carve out this time, we know is a huge ask, but we really appreciate it. We really, it's been great, and we appreciate everybody else who's participated in the Bound Bags, all our colleagues at Federal Highway SHPO and consultants and other INDOT folks. So thanks again, and we look forward to seeing everybody maybe next month for our next one. So
yeah, and if anyone, feedback, ideas, questions, comments, keep them coming. And we'll try to get to them as best we can.
Yep. Thanks all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.